So, you guys look at my window. This is one trip, one path, one across highway. What is State Line Road? What is that? I'm having a brain fart, but State Line Road goes east and west. And you wouldn't believe, it was like, hold on, I'm gonna downshift. It was like something out of the plague, out of the Bible. I mean, the grasshoppers coming across the road. I've never seen anything like that in my life. It's crazy. Oh. So we're going up to look at a grader. It's got a bad leak on it. I got a truck up here that's derated. And that loader I worked on's got something else leaking on it now. There's the grader right there. Let's see what's leaking in this old grader. So it's just hot and dusty and just nasty. Okay. What in the world is the deal here? See if we can get it fired up. See what. Didn't really tell me where it was leaking. It was leaking really bad. Really bad, they said. See, all this is wet here. Where in the hell are you supposed to prop these up at? What am I missing here? There's no holes, no nothing. I should if I know. That's kind of goofy. That is like, what the fuck is the deal with that? Huh. Okay. I don't know what to make of that. I would think that they would go down into this. Something like that, maybe? Huh. Oh, I see a hole behind it. Ah, there's a hole behind that. Ah, right there. Okay. Hey, I figured it out. I'm smarter than the lid. Finally. Guess we'll drive it a little bit and see what it does, huh? This door latch back. Alright. That's the blade tilt. Okay. Okay. Circle rotation, circle side shift. Blade height would be these two. Okay. Champion road grader. Well, I guess I'll back it up the hill or something, and the scarfers are down. Okay, so where's the scarfers at? Auxiliary, this would be auxiliary. Okay. Oh yeah, we're gonna go into the bank there. I just got to make it leak, I guess. They're using the hand throttle as a decelerator. And the foot throttle, that's different. Just not used to this thing. Okay. I just don't know what the hell I'm doing. Trans oil filter light is on. I just run her into the bank, huh? So that should put it in float. Okay, let's see what we got going on here. Alright guys, so this is where the audio kind of took a dump on me here. What happened is I laid the camera down, then I was rubbing something with my finger there, seeing if it was leaking, and it got pumice and with the pumice and grease that's on this thing all mixed in, and then I grabbed the camera, then it plugged all the mic holes up in the camera. So I have that problem remedied. I didn't catch it, of course, till I went home to edit this thing. But anyway, not real familiar with these John Deere graders. I did kind of like the fact that they it looks like they incorporated, see that piston pump on the front of that crankshaft is the same style of pump they put on the old tractors, like the old 4850s, 4960s, 40 series tractors, even the 30 series. And so they utilized, looks like a lot of that kind of stuff. And I was looking in the parts book, and it looks like the planetary transmission that's in it is
really similar to the power shifts in that vintage of like the 4850s too. But I wasn't real familiar when I was actually looking at it here. I'm used to the old champions or the old galleon graders that I've worked on quite a bit, and usually those have a engine that runs a torque converter, like the old galleons used to have a torque converter and a Clark transmission or a Clark torque converter, uh, in the champions. I don't remember what brand transmission Champion used, but I've had a few of those out too as well. But so what's going on here is after I drove it a little bit back and forth, you'll see here in a minute once I figure out where the leak is. It's actually on the back here underneath. There's a what do they call that? A transfer drive, and it basically is a gear train drive box that transfers the engine power from the engine to the transmission. And there's a couple bearing quills. What I'm brushing my finger on right there that's all fuel tank. It's all incorporated into those side panels. That's all one assembly there. And which is kind of funny because when I take this thing apart, there's no bolts holding it on there. It's just sitting on there. Gravity is the only thing holding it. The bolts are gone. There's only two that hold it, but gravity's pretty much holding it on there. So anyway, there's a transfer drive on the back of this, and it's almost got like a, what do you call it? It's not a clutch, but just it's just got a clutch disc up there that takes the shock out like it's a power shift, just like a power shift tractor. I'm having a brain fart and can't remember what you call that, but manufacturers, AGCO calls it different than John Deere. And anyway, basically it's just a disc on the pressure plate there, the flywheel, and then you technically don't even have to use the clutch on this is the same as the tractor's. All it is a dump valve for the power shift, which is kind of funny if you look in the parts book for this thing. They're showing, and if you look up 570A in the parts book, it shows you a cradle or a release fork and everything for the clutch, and there's no clutch in this. It's set up just like a tractor with the clutch linkage actually goes back to a control valve on the side of the transmission, and all it's doing is dumping clutch pressure off the input clutch. That's all it's doing. But that disc there basically runs. It's splined into a shaft that's got a gear on it. It's got a bearing quill, and then that bearing quill runs, is that gear. There's a seal there and an O-ring, and then what it's doing, it's leaking from the top one and running down. There's an inspection hole, kind of an inspection hole there on the bottom of it's kind of halfway down that transfer drive, and the oil is running out of it. There's a line coming into the back of that. You'll see when I'm taking this thing apart. That's force feeding lubrication to the upper and lower bearing quills, and then there's a big drain line on the bottom. So once I get this thing apart, you'll see how this thing works. It's just a big gear drive to transfer the engine power to the transmissions. All it is. But anyway, I'm going to try to bullshit you here for 15 minutes, and while I'm doing this, tell you about some other things that I've been going on. I've had a lot of weird problems, like electrical troubleshooting problems here lately. I got a customer with I think it's a 9260 Heston Swather. So about maybe a week ago, 2 weeks ago, they were cutting some grain hay, and I think it was triticale with some rye mix in it. And that was the Swather that I rebuilt the engine last year. I rebuilt the 4.5 Cummins. Well, of course, it's going to make you nervous when your customer calls you and says it quit running. You're like, oh shit. So I took off one up there. I was kind of worried about it. I thought, man, what the heck did I do wrong? Well, I didn't do anything wrong. What happened is that's got a VP30 Bosch pump. Okay, and it's got, I'm trying to remember, 8 pins on it, or 7 or 8 pins. I think 7. It's got 7 pins on it. Okay. So long story short, we got there and we found quite a few problems. I mean, we had a blown fuse in the cab. It actually wasn't even blown. The fuse holder, and I wiggled the fuse, and I wasn't getting any 5-volt reference on any of the pressure sensors or the uh, speed sensor on the engine. That was the first thing I was trying to track down, and that was that fuse in the cab. Yeah, that was the fuse in the cab was causing that. I actually typed in the serial number to QuickServe for that little Cummins engine, because you can't, those older 9260 Hess and Swathers, you can't find crap on AGCO's thing for it. Even that vintage of Swather, if you guys ever get into one of those, there is no data link connector. It doesn't exist. There's not a data link connector to hook up to. You've just got to pull out a wiring schematic, get on QuickServe, and type in the engine serial number, and you'll find everything you need to know about that engine and the wiring going to it. Now, on the OEM side of things, you're not going to find out a lot, but on the Cummins side, it'll tell you everything. And that's what we did. We started pulling that. There's a round, I think it's a 14-pin, round 14-pin connector, and we started testing that, and we were having like low voltage there, and that was that fuse was, and actually we replaced that 10 amp fuse in the cab because it wasn't burnt out, but like you ever see a fuse do that to where like the male spade on one side of it will burn a little bit or have a bad contact, and it'll pull your voltage down. You'll just get weird voltages all over the place. So anyway, replaced that fuse. We got power. We got our 5-volt reference and everything to all those sensors back there. So we got that problem fixed. So the next thing we went to do, we tried to crank it again and it wouldn't start. So the next thing you do on a VP30 or a VP44, okay, so pin 6 and pin 7, unplug that, and you can get on your smartphone and it'll show you a little wiring schematic. Just Google VP30, VP44, and it'll show you a little schematic of that plug-in that goes on the back of that pump, okay, because that has a control module in the back of that pump. So anyway, pin 6 is the ground and pin 7 is battery power. So what you can do is, if you got a couple small butt connectors, you can just take you a couple wires and you can strip them bare on one end and just wrap them around the battery post, one on the negative, one on the positive. And the other ones, the other end, you can put those small butt connectors, and they fit just right over the male spur. Unplug your what do they call that? The EDC module on the VP30, VP44. Unplug that and put that on the male spades on the pump end. So after you put those power and ground, so power is going to be on pin 7, ground is going to be on pin 6. Now the only thing that thing's going to do, it's kind of a go no go for the pump. If it runs, your pump's fine, you think. As in this case, I put it on there, I thought the pump was fine, because that's what I've always done. Usually you'll plug that in, and if it runs, you know your pump's fine. All it's going to do is idle. It's not going to rev up because you don't have, there's another wire that's to idle position, there's an idle validation, and then there's can high, can low. Okay, so that's the other pins on that. So anyway, unplug that. What we did, we unplugged that, and took our wires off, and I said, well, it's got to be something in this plug. I had power and ground there, and I thought, well, shit, it's probably something in this plug that's shortened internally. And I had a buddy of mine that had an old bus he had bought from the school district because he wanted the engine out of it, and it had a VP44 in it with a 24-valve Cummins. And I called Jake, and I said, man, can I rob this thing, or I'll buy it from you, whatever I got to do, man. He said, yeah, come get it. I don't need it. So we went and cut the end off that plug and went over there and I wired that new plug in. And I thought I had it, and I plugged it in. The son of a gun still wouldn't start. I thought, okay. I said, I probably should have load tested that number 7 wire, because I did a continuity to ground and I had good ground. But I thought, man, that wire feeding that's probably coming from the relay. It's probably, it's probably got one strand, or it's kinked and, broke inside the insulation somewhere, and it's got one strand holding it together. So I ran a new wire to it, son of a gun still wouldn't start. So anyway, long story short, I could take a pair of needle nose pliers and I could unplug the terminal going into the back of the pump, and where pin 7, the battery power, goes into it, I could pull on it just a little bit and tweak that pin a little bit sideways, and then we could get it, then we could plug it in, we could get it to start. So anyway, I had actually tweaked it good enough to where it ran for a week like that. So anyway, I came back because it wouldn't start again, and I pulled that module out of there. Well, I attempted to. So what the deal was, I got the cap screws out of the top, the T25 Torx cap screws out of the top, and there's some kind of, I think there's an advanced solenoid, and I think there's like a spooling solenoid or something like that is what they call it. But I wasn't real sure about that, so I said, I better stop and figure out what we're doing here. Because here's the deal, we sent that pump off a couple, 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, and Oregon Fuel Injection said they rebuilt the entire pump. And now their module they put on there, the solder's already broke loose inside. So I'm not real happy about that, especially for what they charge. They charge you like $2,600, and the thing doesn't last 2 years, and especially with a swather. I mean, here we get 3 cuttings. That swather probably gets 150, maybe 200 hours put on it a year. So you're telling me you charge us $2,500 and your module then lasts 200 hours, 400 hours at the most? I wasn't thinking too much of that. Anyway, I said, man, I told the owner, I said, I got to go back and do a little reading on this and a little research and figure out how to, we should be able to replace that module. And I actually looked online and I found the procedure for removing that module. So I'm going to probably try to go back tomorrow or the next day. I found the modules online for like $80, and you can change that whole module out. So that's the next game plan. We're going to go replace that module, and then we should be fine because the mechanical portion of the pump is fine. Once it's running and you make connection with the power side of that module, it runs just fine. And, it has full power and revs up and idles down. So I know I'm rambling on about some other projects, and it's not really, about this one, but there really isn't much to really talk about on this. It's just really a pretty simple thing. It's just the engine output comes into it's splined to that torque divider or whatever you call it there, that disc on the flywheel. And the purpose of that, if you don't understand that, you don't have to use the clutch pedal on these power shifts. You haven't had to use a clutch pedal on a power shift for years. The whole purpose of that disc, it just has some spring tension like a clutch, and it's not near as solid as a clutch though. What it's supposed to do is you don't have to use the clutch. You can just take that lever and go into forward or reverse without that pedal. And because really all that clutch is an inching pedal. That's all it is really. But you can just use that forward and back. You could almost shuttle shift if you wanted to, if you let it slow down first and not slam it in. But what that's supposed to do is when you go into forward or reverse, that slips just a little bit so it doesn't twist the spines off or break a shaft. And same thing on the tractors. Anyway, so there isn't much to really talk about. It's just the engine output drives that one shaft, which is the input of the transfer drive, and then it comes down to another gear, and it drives the input of the transmission. And there's a transmission pump in there, and planetary transmission. There isn't a whole lot to it, really. So anyway, another project I kind of wanted to tell you about is I really thought I had the New Holland tractor the other day, and that thing has been kicking me in the teeth, man. I have never had so many problems out of such a simple thing like an alternator in my life. So I used to take a lot of alternators apart and rebuild them myself. I mean, I know how an alternator works. So here's the deal, man. You guys watched me. I took that voltage. Okay, remember the original alternator went out. It was on the tractor. We put a brand new one from New Holland on there, and the new one would not charge. So I checked everything. I mean, I spent a whole day checking wire, pulling the instrument cluster out. I pulled the instrument cluster out of it because it It feeds the D positive wire is fed from the instrument cluster with the ignition, and it only does it in the run position when the tractor's running. It doesn't do it key on that tractor. So I ohm checked that wire from whatever plug on the instrument cluster to D positive, cleared it on the alternator, and then I even load tested it with a light bulb, and it was fine. So then I actually did a voltage drop test on the battery positive wire from the battery. It goes from the battery over to the starter, to the stud on the starter, and then it takes off from another wire and goes over the top of the engine over to the alternator. And I did voltage drops on all those, and that wires, all those were fine. And I'm thinking, what in the hell, man? So then that's when you guys saw me. I took the voltage regulator out of the old alternator, stuck it in the brand new alternator, and I had like 13.8 volts. Well, I didn't think much about it, and they ran it for a couple days, and they called me and said, it's doing it again, it's not charging. I said, you're shitting me. So I went over there again, and sure as hell, it wasn't charging. And I thought, well, hell, I put a voltage regulator in it. That old voltage regulator out of that old alternator must have been having trouble, so I ordered another one. I called New Holland, said, this alternator, this new one you sent is no good, and I need another alternator. So they sent me another one. I stuck it in there. It would not charge. I'm not kidding you guys. The second one. The story gets better. So, long story short, I'm on alternator number 3. Let me tell you some of the things that I've done. I took this third alternator that I've got right now. The second one wouldn't do anything. Nothing. I couldn't get anything out of it. I even took it over to Napa and had them test it, and they said they couldn't really test it the right way because it was a 200 amp alternator and they needed a part number, and that particular alternator, Bosch alternator, they've had people come in with that before and they can't get it, so they couldn't even get a part number, and the part number from New Holland doesn't cross into their system. So anyway, he tested it with a different part number from a 90 amp alternator, and it said 0 volts, 0 amps. So it wasn't a really conclusive test, but anyways, I told him to order another one. So I put the third one on there. Well, this one's charging. Okay, if you turn off the AC compressor, it'll charge about 12.6, 12.7 volts. But if you put any kind of load on it, if you turn the AC compressor on, it'll pull it down to 11.6 volts, but it'll stay there. It won't go below that, so you know it's charging. But it's not putting out any amperage. So I'll tell you what I've done. I have taken a battery cable, a battery jumper cable, and I went clear from the battery positive terminal all the way to this positive terminal on the starter. I've tried to excite it by jumping across the post. I've tried to take the battery cable, and because the alternator is grounded through the frame, and I took a battery jumper cable and grounded the frame of the alternator back to the negative post and back to the frame. Didn't make any difference. Would never do right. I've never seen this many problems. I don't know if there's anything else a guy could try that I'm just not catching here. I mean, any alternator I've ever seen that had a D positive exciter wire and just a positive post on terminal for battery power, you could just jump across the terminals with a screwdriver and get them to charge. Or if the exciter wire had power on it, it should charge. But it's just blowing my mind that now I would have 3 bad alternators. But who knows? I took me 4. I had a 6170R. I put 4 VGT actuators, turbo actuators. I put 4 of those on there before I got a good one. So you never know. Anyways, guys, I'll show you when I tear this thing apart later on too. Thanks for watching.